Thank you all for joining me. This is a new video series that I'm going to be doing on a monthly basis, a manga TBR, where I'm going to talk about what series I've read throughout the month, whether they be complete series, single volume series, ongoing series. It doesn't really matter. I just think it's a good way to do mini bite-sized reviews and get my unfiltered raw views on series that I've recently read. Now, I do have a strategy for how I'm going to be doing this. I have 3 jars. I have a jar for series that are to be read, a jar for series that I've read and finished, and a jar for series that need or require rereading, so re-TBR, so to speak. Series that I haven't read in a long time and perhaps need to, reread, as they're no longer fresh in my memory. And I think it's always good to go back to series that you haven't read in a long time, because your feelings towards them might have changed in the years that have elapsed since you first enjoyed it or didn't enjoy it. I think it's also important to kind of go back to read series that perhaps you didn't enjoy but you still wanted to keep, in the hopes that you find a new love for it, which has happened to me a couple of times. But essentially that's how this is going to work. In my TBR jar, I've made a list of every single series that I haven't read that's on my shelf, written them all down on pieces of paper, folded them up, and essentially when I want to pick out a new series, when I've read what I've been reading already, pick a series out of that jar, and I get a nice pleasant surprise of a series. So it's essentially taking out the decision making process of deciding what to read, essentially, and making it more randomized, which makes it a lot more fun. Because one trap that I've fallen into over the years during my collecting is neglecting series, series just kind of wallowing on my shelf unread for years at a time, and I always just thinking, I don't want to read that. So this is just a nice way to kind of force my hand to read series that I otherwise just wouldn't pick up. I may have had an interest in it at a time when I blind bought it, but anyway. That's what this series is going to be, this series of videos. So I hope you stick around. These might be a little bit long depending on how many series I've read in that, in any given month. I think this will be a long video, however, because this is going to include a series that I also read in December 2020 as well. So it's a bit of a jam-packed month, or a couple of months, and I've got a bit to get through. So let's make a start. So the first series I'm going to talk about is The Last of the Mohicans by Shigeru Sigiura. So my thoughts towards this are somewhat mixed. I haven't read the original novel by James Fenimore Cooper, nor have I watched the film or read any of the other adaptations. I mean, this alone is an adaptation of an earlier iteration of this manga by the same author. So the author, Shigeru Sigiura himself, he readapted his original work and came out with this. So, I mean, there's so many filters that this work has already gone through in order to get to this stage. So I can't really judge it or critique it based on the actual story itself. Only, my raw and filtered opinion of this version of it. And it's far too short to really give any kind of comprehensive view on it. The story is interesting. It's about this young boy called Lacarbine Kid, and he's a spy for the British Army, who are at war with the French Army in North America, in what I presume to be the early 1800s, maybe even a little bit earlier. And they're allied with different Native American tribes that are also at war with each other for one reason or another. And it doesn't really explore why that really is. I suppose you really already have to go in already having a clear idea of the history of the occupation of North America by European settlers. So I couldn't really enjoy it that much. I mean, one thing I did like about it was the artwork. Now, the artwork is very, I'd like to say, bizarre. It's presented in this sort of early kind of Western style comic book era aesthetic, which is really accurate to what the author Sigiura was taking his influence from. I mean, this book alone is in a series called the 10-cent manga line, which kind of is I guess a love letter to those sort of earlier comics. They were kind of throwaway and disposable and very quick and choppy, and that very much captures this aesthetic. Even though this was published in the mid 70s, it's got a really earlier feel to it. It's got a real sort of early like 1930s 1940s animation aesthetic to it, and that really shows through in the artwork. There's also a juxtaposition between realistic art styling and very super deformed caricatures, which I did find really interesting. So generally my thoughts on it are, I like it more for its aesthetic, but from a critical standpoint I didn't enjoy it. It's just one of those kind of manga that I own just for its cultural impact and historical significance, and if you're interested in owning manga just for that sort of reason, then go ahead and pick it up. I mean, it may be out of print now, as it's a couple of years old, and there was only 2 manga that were released under this imprint. I mean, the original publisher Picture Box no longer publish manga from what I believe. So there's only this and The Mysterious Underground Men by Osamu Tezuka that are available under this. There was supposed to be more, but unfortunately that never came to pass for one reason or another. But so that was the first thing I read. I think I read this maybe early December last year, so I'm glad that I got through it. And it's got a really interesting essay at the back as well, from Ryan Holmberg, and the author himself, when he just kind of talks about his love for early cinema and Western comics, and where he got his influence from. So that gives a lot of context to the actual manga itself, where if you don't really know much about the author or his style, then that the essay itself provides a little bit of insight, which I found really interesting. Now, the next series I want to talk about is a series that I haven't completed yet, as I'm still waiting for the final volume in the mail, but that's Ralgrad, or Ral Omega Grad. You may recognise the artwork, as the artist is Takeshi Obata of Death Note fame, and the story is by Sunio Takano. So I've read 3 volumes of this, still to finish the final volume. So I just want to start off by saying I'm very glad that this is only 4 volumes, because I really dislike this series. The only redeeming factor for it is the artwork. The artwork is very nice. I mean, basically it exists in the Blue Dragon universe. I think it's Blue Dragon series of games. It's loosely based on that, and it's about the character on the center cover here, called Ral, and he's been imprisoned for the first 15 years of his life because he's got a monster, he's got a dragon inside him. The series doesn't really do a good job of kind of establishing what the monsters in the series are. They're just kind of vaguely defined as shadows, and it attempts to kind of build its own kind of science and theory behind it, but it doesn't really work. And it essentially is the dragon that resides in Ral, called Grad, is like one of the most powerful monsters, like shadows, in his realm. And there's an antagonist called Obscuria, and she's trying to consolidate all of the shadows' power, essentially to take over the human realm. And it's about them trying to journey to her fortress, to essentially kill her. But the main problem with the story itself isn't the theme, it's the characters. I really loathe the characters, especially Ral, the main character. His main motivation in the story is boobs. That is literally it. He's every single shonen protagonist trope. It's just put into one character. Put into one character. He got no depth about him whatsoever. And I suppose really that can account to him being locked away for the first 15 years of his life. He hasn't really learned anything, I suppose. But his companions. He's got a companion, basically his teacher and mentor called Mio, and she's just there to, she's just like titillation for the fan base. It's all fan service, and I don't really mind fan service, but only if it's like, if there's good context to it. The female characters in this are really treated just as kind of, sex appeal, and I dare say that it does venture into just being completely sexist. Now, I am by no means like a diehard feminist or anything like that, but it is offensively bad. The female characters are really purposefully dumbed down, and there's parts in the story where there's, I can't think of a specific example, but I do remember kind of rolling my eyes at a part where I can't remember the exact line, but the gist of it was, you can't really trust a woman to do a man's job, sort of thing. And it was just, such an archaic sort of mode of thinking. It's just really bad. The fan service and the poor characterization dominates the story. It's distracting from the story. So unfortunately, I would not recommend this. It is in the very few series that I truly truly dislike, and it's really a slog to read through. Even though the volumes are really short, you could read them one in an hour. Sometimes it just gets me, the first 2 volumes, it took me about 2 days to get through them, because I was just reading like one chapter at a time and just having to put it down because it was just so bad. And Ral as a main character is so unlikable. Just stay away from this. I out of print anyway, so you're not likely going to be able to get your hands on it, so you're not missing anything by not reading it. I unfortunately will have to suffer through reading the final volume just for the sake of being able to kind of talk about it. So that will most likely be next month. But they're my thoughts on Ralgrad, unfortunately. Now, towards the end of December, I was very fortunate to pull out of my TBR jar two books that I've been really, really wanting to read for quite a while. And I just so happened to pull them out consecutively. So I was very lucky to reread these basically one after the other. And that was Junji Ito's Smashed, and also Junji Ito's Shiver, both of which are short story collections. Let's give my thoughts on those. Junji Ito has become really popular as of late. Viz Media alone are doing a really good job on pushing out his work. He's already got 2 more series coming out at some point this year. That being Love Sickness and Center, I believe. And there are 2 more series that I'm due to pick up, being Venus in the Blind Spot and Remina, which are 2 recent releases, and they're always releasing these beautiful deluxe hardcovers. I like both of these for different reasons. Some, as with any short story collection, there are stories that are really, really good and some that aren't so good. Some highlights for me personally were Earthbound, which is a short story in Smashed, where people randomly just kind of get stuck in a certain pose, like they're just T-posing, or just kind of stood in the same sort of spot, and they're unable to move. You can interact with them, but they literally cannot be physically moved from that spot, and it becomes a bit of a pandemic in Japan, where people start becoming anchored to the same spot. It's a really, really, really interesting concept, something that Junji Ito is an absolute master of. He can take the most mundane things and make them really unsettling and disturbing. So Earthbound in Smashed was a really good one. Another one was one in Shiver, where it's this really creepy sort of like human centipede thing, and it's basically this girl who her partner is desperate to marry her, and it turns out that he's got this sort of weird family where generations upon generations of his relatives, basically towards the end of their lives, they chop off the top of their heads and basically merge them with the other chopped off heads of their older relatives. So they've kind of got this like shared memory. It's so disturbing. That was a really good one. Another one as well was the title story of Smashed, called Smashed. I won't spoil that one because it's really gruesome. It's really gruesome. Another one, I believe was in Shiver, was about a family who run a fast food takeaway, and they live in the apartment above, and because they're poor and they can't afford proper air filtration, the oil and the grease from the cooking just kind of rises and seeps up into the flat where they live. So they just perpetually live in this state of like just greasiness, like the skin's all oily and greasy. They produce oil, they live in oil so much that they become dependent on it like a drug. And it's just disgusting. It's so grotesque. Like the main character's brother develops really bad acne and starts freaking her out. And there's this scene where like he smushes his face, and like when he smushes his face, like all of the pus, like all his spots just start bursting out. And he's doing it over his sister, and like all this pus is like going into her face and her mouth. It's just disgusting. And Junji Ito is so good at that. The only real letdown really with his artwork is commonly that his characters quite often fall into like same face syndrome. Like a lot of his characters just look exactly the same, so there's not really that much variation in the type of characters that you see. But with the Junji Ito, you're not really going into, especially when it's short stories, you're not really going into stories wanting to kind of develop an attachment to the characters. You're more in for it just for what grotesque imageries you're going to show, and what situations, what horrific situations are the characters going to be put into, and it's just so good. It's just like really cheesy 90s style horror, like body horror, gross kind of gore and stuff like that. Perfect read like around Halloween and stuff. And the artwork, as always with Junji Ito, is just sublime. He's got such a really good flair for drawing really macabre, grotesque sort of human forms and stuff. Like there's a particular character in a story about a fashion model. And she's just this really tall, lanky, demon-looking woman with like just a horrible maw of sharp teeth, and she's just really disturbing because she just kind of stands there like staring, at our character. She's really disturbing, the kind of thing that you would you would hate to wake up in your bed and like she's just like there stood in your corner. That kind of horrible demon, just horrible, just unsettling sort of caricature, I suppose. So yeah, Shiver and Smashed. I'm so lucky that I read both of these consecutively. I was really surprised and happy when I pulled both of the slips of paper out of my TBR jar to read them. So yeah, anytime I enjoy something, I always just read through things, through them as quickly as I possibly can. And they're so accessible and easy to pick up. The kind of manga where you can just pick it up off your shelf, read like a little short story in like 10 minutes or so. Anytime. They're just they're really digestible, and it's just I can imagine I will frequently be going back to reading these on a weekly basis, just to get as much Junji Ito as I possibly can. I've also got Frankenstein, Tomie, and No Longer Human, and his Cat Diary short story to read as well. So I've still got a lot of Junji Ito to get through, as well as the releases that I haven't even yet picked up. I'm not looking forward to the day when Viz Media catch up on everything that he's released, because then we won't have any more Junji Ito for a while, unless he's I think he's still publishing work. I don't think he's retired yet, thankfully. I'm just glad he's so popular. Like I'm loving the Junji Ito. Viz Media, please, more Junji Ito. Oh, I've also got the Dissolving Classroom, which is released by Vertical. I always forget about that one simply because it isn't in the Viz Media line. But yeah, I've still got quite a lot of Junji Ito to get through. What else did I like of this? There was also another really good short story in Shiver about balloons. About like kind of anthropomorphic balloons that basically attach to their host. So basically they're like balloon versions of actual people, and they're just trying to kill them. Like they've got like a cord and they're just trying to hang people. It's such a silly concept, but it's just done so well. You know, Junji Ito could take any dumb concept and make it scary, and that's why he's such a master. And I love him for it. You know, he's just brilliant at it. The next thing I read, which was around late December, I believe, was my first manga from New York Review, or New York Comic Review, I believe. Anyway, The Man Without Talent, a Gekiga manga by Yoshiharu Tsuge. I've heard a lot of good things about this author. I'm glad we're getting some of his work published in the West. So this manga essentially centers around this main character here, whose name escapes me, but he is the titular man without talent. I believe this work is actually semi-autobiographical, so Yoshiharu Tsuge himself has put aspects of himself within this character, but just accentuated them a little bit more, because the main character is such a piece of shit. He's so selfish and short-sighted, and basically it centers around his numerous failed business ventures, taking on new hobbies and new niche interests and trying to make a business out of them, and just utterly failing and not having the foresight to realize, you know, what a detriment it's having to him and his family, his wife and his son. And you know, his long-suffering wife is there, constantly complaining with good reason. Because they're not able to make ends meet. You know, he's such a cheapskate, and such a real piece of crap. Like you just don't root for him. Like you're almost wanting him to fail, and I suppose that's the kind of the charm of the manga to a certain degree, because each chapter follows like, you know, a new business venture of his, and you know, ultimately the punchline of that chapter is him going to be failing, and you know, having to kind of, you know, tuck his tail between his legs and accept that, you know, he's just an idiot. I mean, the guy sells rocks. Like for the majority of the manga, he sits on a riverbank, selling rocks that he thinks are just aesthetically beautiful, because, you know, at one point in another, in time, rocks of interesting geometric shapes were like all the rage in the art world, but he missed the train by like 10 years, so now it's completely out of fashion, and he's trying to revive it to absolutely no success. And it's just pathetic. You know, he just kind of sits out there in the rain, like under his little shack, like with just rocks that he just doesn't sell because nobody wants to buy. And each business venture that he takes up, I mean, he's not even fully committed to it or committed to them, because, you know, more often than not, he's not even that good at them. So he invests so much money and so much time for little or no payout whatsoever, because he can't even commit to being good at these ventures, which is obviously why he constantly fails. And it's embarrassing, you know, for him. And the manga itself is quite tongue-in-cheek about it. It's entertaining and I enjoyed it, but I couldn't help being constantly frustrated at how bad of a businessman and, you know, failure generally as a human being the main guy was. You know, he's constantly being berated by his wife to, you know, go back to creating manga, which is what he was originally good at. And he just doesn't register in his head that, you know, he's not making life any easier for himself or his family, and he just really neglects his responsibilities to his family, you know, his son and his wife. Then you just become, I mean, I suppose to a certain degree that's the whole purpose of the manga, and it worked. It evoked that reaction within me. So, you know, the job is done. It's not really a manga that I enjoyed per se, but it did the job that it set out to intend. It did the job that it intended, in making me kind of pissed off. But it is something I feel I will reread in the future, and I am looking forward to more of Yoshiharu Tsuge's work. In fact, I just recently picked up The Swamp by him, and, you know, I just know his name has been universally renowned as you know, one of the pioneers of the Gekiga movement. So I would love to see more of his work, you know, here in the West, and I think this is a really good entry point into his work, especially because it's so personal to him as well. And I believe this also has an essay in the back. It does. Yeah, where is Yoshiharu Tsuge? But Yoshiharu Tsuge, he goes on very long hiatuses. I don't think he's actually created anything since like the late 80s. So this is a really good exploration into what kind of artist he is, I suppose. I'm wondering if any of his other manga will have this overarching message of idleness and procrastination and failed ambition. This really kind of nihilist view on everyday life, which I suppose to a certain degree we could all kind of relate to. We've all been in situations like that, but this guy unfortunately lives in a perpetual state of failure, which is very, very interesting. It's quite unlike anything I've read before. There's no happy ending really. It's just kind of a snapshot of this character's life, and because they live in this perpetual state of failure without the ability to realize it. There's no peaks and troughs with a story like this. It really just is completely neutral throughout, and captures really the stark reality of how boring and mundane life can be for some people. So interesting in that regard, I would say, and I would pick it up definitely. Okay, the next thing, believe it or not, is the first ever Clamp series that I've read. Now, I've been collecting manga now for nigh on 10 years, more than 10 years, about 12 years, on and off. And in that time, I've never delved into Clamp. I mean, I know how historically significant Clamp are, but I always kind of wrote them off as just, this is going to sound really bad, but I'm not really into shoujo. I always thought Clamp were just kind of, catered to that demographic, and kind of wrote them off as outside of my interest. I regret that now, having read Tokyo Babylon by Clamp. Let's talk about this. I really, really enjoyed it. So this is one of two omnibus volumes, as you can see here, by Dark Horse. I've had volume 1 on my shelf for years, and I finally decided to pick up volume 2 about a year ago, just because I don't like having gaps in my collection, and I was just never really interested in reading it. I've always been drawn to the art style. I mean, I remember being a kid and seeing Cardcaptor Sakura on TV, and I always enjoyed that. And I always liked the kind of like lanky, tall characters with the broad shoulders and like the long faces and the large expressive eyes and things like that. They've always had like that really unique sort of character aesthetic, and this manga here is no different. This is actually one of the first BL titles to be released in the West. Now, I've never read BL before, or those who may not be familiar with the term, boys love shonen ai. So manga that have a it's like romance, but for homosexual romance, but without the actual sex. So there are homosexual themes in it, without actually delving too much into it. Like there's no like relationships or sex, or not really that much romance in it, and that's what I always thought this was. And I'm not really into romance anyway, which is why I just kind of held off on reading it, as well as it's a shoujo, and I'm not really into it does that kind of sort of stuff doesn't really appeal to me. But it's I guess you could say that was just my ignorance towards it. This is kind of to a certain degree opened my eyes that shoujo manga, don't matter how, I don't know, masculine or whatever you are, it doesn't matter how attuned to your own demographic you are, whether that be seinen, shonen, josei, shoujo. It's always good to kind of explore outside of your own comfort zone. and this was a real eye opener for me. What was difficult for me with this, because I did try reading this a couple of, when was it? Last year I tried reading it, and the first couple of chapters are really bad. Basically, the whole story it centers around this character here called Subaru, and he's an onmyoji, and an onmyoji is basically like the Japanese version of an exorcist. He's got spiritual powers, and he goes around helping people with different spiritual ailments, removing curses, exorcising evil spirits, that sort of thing. So he's basically like a medium and an exorcist. And each chapter is kind of like a story of the week. There's a new character introduced, with a certain spiritual kind of problem, and he's there to kind of resolve that for them. So it follows him and also his twin sister, and that's his twin sister is really annoying. There's also another character called Seishiro, who's a veterinarian and also has his own kind of spiritual powers. And the clan that Subaru belongs to is historically a rival of Seishiro's clan, and they both essentially provide the same sort of service, albeit the difference being Seishiro will, if need be, kill his clients if there is a danger there. So Subaru and the clan that he belongs to have more of a moral compass to them, so to speak. But Subaru doesn't know this. This is something that kind of there are little nuggets of information about Seishiro and Subaru's past that are presented at short points, throughout the story from the beginning to the end. We know without spoiling anything. But essentially, just to go back to my original point, the first couple of chapters try to establish these characters in the worst way possible. I think the manga gets the worst start, and then around halfway through the first volume, it really kind of takes its stride, and the individual stories, in each chapter, really make me sympathize with the characters a lot more and empathize with them. And to what, by the time I started reading the second omnibus volume, I'd already fallen in love with it. There are some really, really hard-hitting stories, some really interesting social commentaries about suicide, poverty, things like that are really well explored in essentially what is you might as well call it a short story collection, because each chapter manages to introduce a new character, develop them really well, and then the next chapter, the next chapter is a completely new story. You don't get to see that character again. One thing I really, really love about this as well is the artwork. I mean, the artwork is just gorgeous. There's some really, really good dynamic paneling, and there's some really interesting boom pages, and that, especially the boom page, the double spread pages, where that's where Clamp really get to make their artwork shine. The artwork is just absolutely beautiful. I was really, really impressed. There's a clear dedication to compositioning, and that you can see they've really truly mastered the fundamentals of storytelling and how the artwork can also tell the story. So it's not just all text. Some authors rely too much on exposition, text heavy exposition, and don't allow the artwork to breathe. This is a manga where the artwork just breathes. It's so good. And it was one of them rare series where I start it and I don't enjoy it, and then I'm really, really pleasantly surprised, and fall in love with it. This is definitely a reread for me. I was really impressed, very, very, very impressed. It's set in 1991, so this is just after the Japanese recession, when the economic bubble collapsed. And it really is a manga of its time. It's very critical of that, of that period in Japanese history. It's very critical of the effect that it had on the everyday lives of people, even though it's a supernatural story, and it's far-fetched in certain regards. It's also very human, and it gives a really good social commentary and insight onto the state of Japan at the time that this was published. So in that regard, I would say it's also historically significant, especially given the renown that Clamp as a creative team have as well. So this, I think, is an absolute must-read. The ending, without spoiling anything, is very open-ended, and there is a sequel series to this called X, which is set a number of years later in the story. It's set in 1999. Unfortunately, from what I know, that series has been on an indefinite hiatus for a long time, so we don't know whether or not that will ever be finished, and that's kind of the reason why I'm holding off on reading it, because I really want to know the resolution to Subaru's story, because I really grew to like him, and the relationship between him and Seishiro. I would really hope that in the sequel series X, Subaru and Seishiro's character arc is concluded in a nice way, because the ending for this was quite tragic. I'm all for a tragic ending. They often tend to be more memorable because they're much more emotionally impactful, obviously. And the ending for this it ended on a real somber note. So I may start X at some point just to see if there's hopefully a nice conclusion to their story arc. But definitely, I would highly recommend reading this. Even considering that the sequel series hasn't got a conclusion. This was pleasantly surprising for me, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. The only real drawback to it being the first couple of chapters, where it just fails to properly establish the characters, in my view. So yeah, Tokyo Babylon was just, overall, it was fantastic. Now the next series is a series that everybody knows about. This is a series that I've actually read a number of times, but never in this edition, and that is Akira by Katsuhiro Otomo, his seminal cyberpunk masterpiece. Akira has a special place in my heart for a number of reasons. It's the first cyberpunk manga I ever read. It's the first anime that I ever watched. I watched the anime when I was 6. Never really understood what it was, but it had a massive impact on me. It had a really strong impact on me, especially for how violent it was. It was the first time I'd seen violence in a movie, let alone an animated movie. So the animation had a very deep impact on me. It's one of my fondest memories, watching that film at such a young age. And the manga was no different. The manga is unique in a sense that each volume is like 500, 600 pages long, and it's continuous. There's no break in terms of there's no chapters or anything like that. So it's a continuous, fluid read, and I've never read anything like that before. Now in this edition, it's presented in its original right to left reading format, and the sound bubbles are all retained in their original Japanese. So it's the most authentic version of this manga you can read. So I mean that didn't in any way alter my reading experience. It felt like I was kind of meeting an old friend after a long time. I mean it's been such a while since I've read Akira, because I actually had the original Dark Horse paperbacks, which were flipped. It's been such a long time since I've read this that I felt like I was kind of reading it new again, and I thought that it would take me a while to get through it, but you can pretty much read one volume in a couple of hours, if even that. You can read them quicker. They're such fast reads. I mean, for some reason I thought it was going to take me a long time to get through them, because overall it's like 2,000 pages. I read all 6 volumes in less than a week, and that was just on and off. Just an hour or two a night. I was reading one volume a day, and it's just, it's just amazing. Basically, it's if you've watched the film, which is also directed by Katsuhiro Otomo, the film is basically essentially a trailer for the manga. The manga is so much more expansive, and the characters are so much more developed in the manga than they are in the film. I'm not really going to talk about the story, because I mean, it's popular enough that I'm sure everybody really knows about it. But essentially, just to kind of condense it down, it's set in the future, where the Third World War has already happened. A new type of bomb was detonated over Tokyo, and from the ruins spawned Neo Tokyo, this futuristic megalopolis run by biker gangs and rife with drugs and capitalism. And Canada and his biker gang are they were born into this world. Canada's second in command, Tetsuo, is in a motorbike accident with a mysterious young wrinkly boy who has psychic powers, and that awakens his own psychic powers. And the story really follows Tetsuo awakening his psychic powers. And in the midst of this is also a government conspiracy with other psychic children and the titular Akira. Who is Akira? What relation does he have to this story? And that is the most important thing about this manga, in that Akira has such a vital role, unlike he does in the film. Now, if you've watched the film, Akira is just this unseen, unknown character. Is a much more of an enigma in the film, and he's still an enigma in the manga, but at the very least you get to see him. In the film you don't. He's just this forgotten character. You don't really know what he is. So it's really nice to see him in the actual manga itself. And that the action and the artwork is just so ambitious. I mean, even for its time, when it was published in the late 80s, mid to late 80s, it was even ambitious back then, and it holds up so well. It's amazing that a team. I mean, Satoshi Kon was also involved in this. Satoshi Kon was one of Katsuhiro Otomo's assistants in drawing this. So it's really got some grade A talent behind it. This is one of my favourite manga of all time. I'm not really here to talk about my raw feelings towards it, because I've always loved this manga. I'm just so glad to own it in this collector's edition. In hardback, all of the artwork in its original format. There's nothing more really I can say about it. A lot of people already own this, and the box set that it comes in. It's just I believe that this is the best way to own this, and I love it even more than I did when I originally read it over 10 years ago. So this is a fantastic. A fantastic series to reread for me, and I can imagine rereading it again in another couple of years and feeling exactly the same. So yeah, that's it's Akira. What more can you say? It's a cultural masterpiece. Now, the next thing I pulled out of my TBR jar in January was The Ice Wanderer and Other Stories by Jiro Taniguchi. This is a nice short read. As you can see, it's quite thin. And this has been on my wish list for years. I could see it going in and out of print. So let's talk about this. So The Ice Wanderer and Other Stories. It's published by Ponent Mon, who I believe are a Canadian publisher. Fanfare. I don't know if they're called Fanfare or Ponent Mon or Fanfare Ponent Mon. Anyway, they're a fantastic publisher, and they're the ones who published most of or all of Jiro Taniguchi's work. Many of quite a bit of which I own. But the Ice Wanderer, I think, is a really good entry point for anybody who's wanting to get into his manga, as it's essentially a series of short stories, but they all share a similar theme of being set in the Canadian and Alaskan frontier. Now, to start off with this, just to get this out of the way, there was one thing that I didn't really like with this, and it's the stylized dialogue. So the text in this, the speech when the characters are talking to each other, are set in a really unusual the stylization. I guess to kind of convey that they're speaking in a certain accent, which I found quite jarring. Because I didn't feel it was handled that well, and I'm not too familiar with the Canadian accent or Alaskan accent anyway to really know whether or not it was authentic or if it portrayed it well enough. it just read like they were talking broken English, and I couldn't really, like, in my mind as I was reading it, I couldn't really pin an accent on it. So for some reason in my mind they were all just speaking like Texans, like Southern Americans. So it was a really jarring experience, but it's still easier to follow the stories. You know, you can still, the stories are good enough that the unusual dialogue doesn't detract away from them too much. You know, it's not too distracting. Each story is set in what we assume to be like the early 20th century, maybe late 19th century. You know, new settlers, you know, in this vast open, you know, frontier that is, you know, wrought with, you know, wildlife and, you know, dangers, and, you know, you can get killed by the weather or a pack of wolves. You know, it really does a good job of showing the vast expanse of a part of the world that is, you know, wholly underdeveloped, and nor should it be developed. You know, it's a part of the world that is mostly untouched by human civilization. You know, it's an absolute gem. It does a really good job of capturing how beautiful, you know, Canada or Alaska really is, but also how dangerous it is, and that, you know, that thin line between exploration and death, and how quick death can come when you're exploring a territory that is as vast as you know, the frontier, and each story kind of encompasses that, you know, with its own unique characters. One of the stories, particularly the title chapter, the title story, that being actually is based on the journals of an actual explorer, I believe, called Jack London. I don't know if this is a fictional character or if this is an actual explorer, but it's presented in a way that that's Taniguchi's interpretation of this is based on the journals of this explorer, and being led after being lost in the wilderness by a native who is looking for this legendary, like, moose. My description of it is terrible, but you can clearly see that Taniguchi had a love, particularly for this part of the world, and he's adapted it in such beauty, you know, in the really detailed landscapes, and the mountains and the snow, and, you know, the forests, that you know, he must have done some extensive research in order to you know, put this to paper, because he does a really good job of it. This is such a beautiful short story collection. I would just urge anybody to pick it up. Anyway, it's really, really enjoyable, and again, something that's, I believe, a good entry point into Taniguchi's other works. Is from his other works that I've read, they've been a lot more subdued than this. I mean, in this, you know, that there's action in this that I haven't otherwise seen in any of Taniguchi's other works. That's very different from other titles that I've experienced. If it's like The Zoo in Winter and The Walking Man, which are very much focused on introspection and you know, an individual character as they live, you know, just kind of like the mundanities of life. This one is different in that regard, because his artwork really flares in the you know, in the crescendo moments, I guess you could say, where there's action, and the action obviously comes from you know, the wildlife that they that some of the characters you know, come into confrontation with, whether that be a pack of wolves or a legendary bear that's, you know, a vicious man-eater. He does a really good job of showing action in that regard, and how Taniguchi is also really good at that as well. You know, not just about, you know, character introspection and you know, the human condition. You know, he's got some good action set pieces in it. So for that reason, again, you know, if you're into that, that's something I would definitely also recommend you read, you know, The Ice Wanderer and Other Stories. Okay, the last thing that I read for January was the second Satoshi Kon manga I've ever read, and that was Dream Fossil. Is it Dream Fossil and Other Stories? No, just Dream Stories, the complete stories of Satoshi Kon. So this surprised me. Judging by the cover, I thought this was going to be about dreams, and I thought there was going to be like an overarching theme to these stories, but surprisingly enough, a lot of the stories are just kind of slice of life. There's a couple of sci-fi stories in it, but for the most part they are mostly just slice of life. The first couple of stories I really didn't enjoy. I mean, I like Satoshi Kon, I like his films, and this is a really interesting manga to own because, you know, this is stories that he released prior to him becoming an anime film director. A lot of these stories were kind of one-shots that were published in Young magazine, like in the 80s, around the time that he was an assistant to Katsuhiro Otomo. You can definitely see how much of an influence perhaps Katsuhiro Otomo had on his later art style, or in fact his earlier art style, because there's a short story, 2-chapter short story in this called Toriko, and it's very Akira-like, and you can definitely see Otomo's flair in that, in terms of the character designs and the themes it explores. But I was surprised with this manga. I was at first I felt kind of let down because it didn't meet my expectations at first. Satoshi Kon has a way of presenting dialogue that seems a little bit messy at first, and the conversations that characters have just don't really seem to have that much structure, which I found kind of distracting. I didn't really enjoy it in some of the stories, and I couldn't really empathize or relate with some of the characters in the earlier stories. But then about halfway through, there's a story called Baseball Brats, and I really enjoyed that one. Really enjoyed that one. And there's also another story about a man who he's dressed up as Santa during Christmas, and he finds a little lost girl, and he decides to help her get home. That was really heartwarming, really nice. So that there are stories in it that really touch on human emotion, and it's amazing that in such a short period of time, I mean, some of the stories are only 20 pages long. He's able to establish, such heavy emotion in certain characters and such weighty themes that really resonate with the reader. I mean, at least they did with me in certain regards. So that very much was a redeeming factor for reading this, and negated my overall, I don't want to say disdain, that's too strong a word, but disappointment, I suppose, with how I thought the manga as a whole was going to turn out. There's also moments of comedy in it as well. There's particularly a story with it's really bizarre. It's towards the end. It's a story about an old woman in a hospital who really wants to go to the beach with her family, and she just randomly she starts like the bed trolley that she's on in the hospital. The nurse forgets to put the brakes on the trolley, so she just goes on this adventure on this trolley, this unstoppable trolley that she can't stop through a city, and getting into all sorts of hijinks, crashing into people, and it's really funny. It's really funny. And by the end of it, you've just got like an entire crowd of people like chasing after her. Very Satoshi Kon, very bizarre, and I could see it really reminded me of a scene in, I believe it's Millennium Actress, where the title, the main character is running through like loads of kind of set pieces and dreams and getting chased by loads of people. I can't remember if that was Millennium Actress or Paprika, but that story in particular in this, where of the old woman on a hospital bed, rolling uncontrollably through a city, really reminded me of Satoshi Kon's films. So you could see his artistic flair and flair for unusual comedy even at this early stage, which I really appreciated. So I guess with this one, I needed to let it marinate. The the first couple of stories just didn't hit me, but towards the second half, or from the second half, that's where the stories became really interesting for me, and the dialogue felt a lot more refined, and easier to follow. Like the character interactions were a lot more clear and set. You knew who was talking to who, or you knew what dialogue, speech bubble, you know what character that corresponded to, and such. Which unfortunately wasn't really evident in the first couple of stories. The dialogue was quite scattered, so I was pleasantly surprised when I found that the later stories, kind of either abandoned that sort of style of dialogue interaction, or perhaps I don't know the reason why, but it just became a lot tighter, should I say. So I guess I would recommend this. Anybody who's a fan of Satoshi Kon, definitely. If you're Satoshi Kon is one of those renowned directors that I think even if you're not that much of a fan of him, if you have any interest in film studies, or story creation, narrative or anything like that, then I think this is something to read for sure, even though some of the stories are quite hit and miss. For how renowned Satoshi Kon is, I think it's definitely worthwhile having in anyone's collection. It's a nice release by Viz. The only downside to the actual release itself is that the paper quality is in this really horrible, pulpy sort of newspaper-like format. It doesn't really... It makes the book feel a little bit flimsy, considering that it's, the size of it and the fact that it's got French flaps. It feels like a really cheap release. But anyway, this isn't a review. This is what I've been reading. So that was a lot to go through. There was also one more thing that I read as well, and that was Abara by Tsutomu Nihei. Now, I'm not going to talk about this because I read this in early December, and I don't really remember that much about it. I did really enjoy it at the time, but I'm going to reread it and talk about it perhaps in my next month's my February manga TBR, or February manga wrap up video, because I'm going to reread this and reconsolidate my thoughts on it. So I'm not going to talk about this for now. But anyway, this video is probably going to be very long, but that's okay. Thank you for watching. If you've made it this far, then drop your thoughts and comments in the description below of what you might have read this month. Have you read any of these titles? What did you think of them? Give me some feedback on this video as well. If this is a new style of video that I'm making as well. If you want to see a review on any of these individual series, then also let me know. And if you're new to my channel, consider subscribing, like the video, especially like the video, because that helps with the YouTube algorithm for my videos to get more notice and more exposure. So please, if you're watching the video, please like the video. And if you want to, if you feel so inclined, subscribe. That definitely helps me. So yeah, you will see me doing this again in February. I'm already reading something out of my TBR, so I'm not going to talk about that yet, as obviously I haven't finished it yet. Yeah, okay, all right, I'm tired. I've talked enough. Thank you.